everyone. Dr. Ames here. This time the topic is managing diversity. And we're going to take a look at diversity from a little bit different perspective than we normally would, from an organizational perspective. Here are our learning objectives for this time. By the time we get through all the material and discuss this stuff, you should be able to identify the four layers of diversity, how to manage diversity, understand the current state of the glass ceiling. We'll talk about affirmative action, and you should know the basics of that by the time we're done. The current demographic trends in the workforce, um, both the positive and negative effects of diverse work environments, and we'll compare some of the theories that really discuss those in detail. Uh, a little bit of information on the barriers and challenges that you'll encounter when you try and manage diversity. And then we'll wrap it up by talking about R. Roosevelt Thomas and his ideas on how to manage diversity. This is a different type of graphic than you normally see associated with discussions of diversity, the four layers of diversity. And you can see them here: personality, inner dimensions, internal dimensions, external dimensions, and organizational dimensions. And this is not normally the way we would look at this sort of a topic, because it takes a different perspective. But this will expand our thinking a little bit. Diversity really does pertain to all of us as individuals, and because of that, everything starts with our own personality. We bring our personality with us wherever we go. It's our unique identity, and in that sense, it is our most basic element of diversity, that uniqueness. We have other individual dimensions other than our personality, but you can see here that personality is the center of it all. We've got our age, we've got gender, we have sexual orientation, physical ability, and ethnicity or race, however you want to divide that up. Those are the internal dimensions of diversity. We can expand our thinking outwards a little bit more, and we can look at the external dimensions of diversity. And we're really talking about just another outward layer. The elements in this external dimension are derived from all those things in our personality and those associated things in our internal dimensions of diversity. And you can see how varied these elements are. They include everything from our geographic location, where we work, to the work itself and the nature of that work, to our educational experiences, to the way we look, and the habits that we display to others. And then finally, we have the organizational dimension of diversity. This is really the only layer of diversity that is not about us individually. This includes all sorts of interesting perspectives on, for instance, how our everyday work life goes will depend a lot on where we fall in the various categories. Your management status, for instance, you're either in a position of authority or you are a subordinate, but everyone is a subordinate to someone or something else. And this certainly makes a difference in how we view and interact with the world outside of ourselves, where we fit into these various categories and the behaviors that we display. And so many things are there in the organizational dimension that affect us, whether we are in a union or not, what our seniority status is, what department we work in, what specialized or unique skills that we possess and are relied upon to use. All of these things make up the organizational diversity that we interact with on a daily basis. When we manage diversity, we have to make sure that we use merit, ability, and special skills as the main considerations when we hire and select people. And we should use those same criteria when we promote and compensate everyone who works for us. Promotion and compensation should reflect a person's job performance, and it should reflect their initiative and special skills. So it should be measurable things, but it should also be as holistic a package as possible to really understand a person's contributions. We can also use education to manage diversity by providing education for women and minority managers, We can also provide education to eliminate stereotypical thinking in the workforce and so forth. And we can make this work by setting goals that encourage positive diversity thinking. So if it's part of our espoused values, then that just makes us a stronger organization. And we need exposure. That means getting people of different backgrounds together, expanding your hiring and recruiting pools so that you can get a wider selection of qualified applicants to choose from. And that's how you can help your organization make itself more diverse over time. Now, the glass ceiling has been around a while. In fact, since 1986, the term itself was coined by a couple of Wall Street journalists, Carol Heimowitz and Timothy Shellhart, at that time. And they were writing that there was this invisible barrier that held back women. Today, we stretch the definition a little bit to include minorities of all types that are blocked from advancement to those highest upper level managerial and executive positions within organizations. Now, Heimowitz later in 2004, about 20 years later after he coined this term in that one article, made a comment that the glass ceiling, in her view, was broken. Well, it just depends on what data you're looking at and so forth. I think for the most part, it's partly true because you can find examples out there that are contrary to the average thinking. But women still make less than men in general. Depending on the textual material you're reading, it's somewhere between 24 and 28%. But there are plenty of examples that run contrary to that. And that's what you'll find in this YouTube video here. I'm not going to play it for you now, but you can take a look at that on your own time. And it's really a short one, and it talks about 16 female CEOs who make 40% more than their male counterparts at the time. The short video was made in 2010, but it does show us that this is a changing situation. So today, it's probable that the glass ceiling affects minorities as much or maybe even more than it does women. There simply is just a lot of discrimination in the workforce. And the workforce is simply a reflection of what we see in society, so we should expect to see that. For instance, complaints filed with the EEOC by members of minority groups is way up, and it continues to rise, and companies continue to pay out settlements in the millions of dollars over time. So we have some imbalances to still deal with as a society. Let's switch our attention a little bit here now to affirmative action. We got this concept from John Kennedy, President Kennedy, and the words come right out of his executive order that he issued in 1961, where he said we need to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and then employees are treated during employment without regard to race, creed, color, or national origin. And that was the first language that has been modified so many times since, but it's what got us started with affirmative action. Now, as an executive order, it was not quite the same as the weight of a piece of legislation, and it consisted of both voluntary or involuntary responses to this issue. Now, just like it says here, the intent was really to affirm that the government was committed to providing an equal opportunity for all qualified people, regardless of these things you see here. And in other words, true equal opportunity for all. This executive order was superseded by several, by President Johnson, who took over after Kennedy was assassinated. And what these executive orders did was just expand the language and so forth. The affirmative action executive orders do not impose quotas. That's the first thing to understand. There are no quotas. Quotas are illegal. And it does not mean that you hire unqualified persons just to change the ethnic balance of your workforce, so to speak. That's not what it's about. It's about trying harder, casting a bigger net, and trying to find more qualified applicants so that you will end up with a somewhat more diverse workforce. And it's done to rectify imbalances in hiring and practices that have existed for lifetimes and indeed generations. So that's the reasoning behind the whole thing. And there is no doubt today that affirmative action has benefited women and minorities in the workplace. Um, Research since the inception of AA in the early 60s has revealed a few general things. We do know that white males view AA much more negatively than women or minorities do. And of course, that is easy to understand because women and minorities are the ones that are benefiting from this program. And affirmative action has been viewed more positively by liberals and progressives and Democrats in general than by conservatives or Republicans. So um, this is no surprise either. This is pretty typical of most things in our country that are political. But there is a lot of stereotypical thinking that remains and outright racism out there that cause some people to have an outright negative view of affirmative action. Um, so managing diversity is a complicated issue that has to take into account what is the law of the land. And although it is not an exact law, the government does have the ability to step in and make companies submit a plan if they find that they have too many discrimination lawsuits and so forth from the EEOC. Um, so affirmative action really came out of the notion of equal employment opportunity for all. And it was about correcting those past imbalances and really about offering opportunity to those who have been denied it in the past. And for some organizations, it meant making some changes in the way things were done. For other organizations, it simply meant continuing on the path they were on already and improving on the things that they were doing that bring people together. And there's a widespread realization out there that there's incredible talent everywhere, and diverse talent makes a company stronger. And you certainly, a strong company is going to be more successful in the marketplace or in the nonprofit sector or wherever it's at. Here's some basic demographic trends that we do see today in the workplace. Um, the changing balance of ethnicity is certainly all around us. Euro Americans will probably be in the minority by about 2050. Um, the largest population growth will remain amongst Latino and Asian American populations. Asian American groups have outpaced Latino groups for the first time, and they are now the fastest growing group of immigrants. But the Latinx world is still the most numerous of all the immigrant groups today in America. And of course, median annual incomes for members of minority groups is less than that of Euro Americans across the board, except for Asian Americans and Arab Americans, which sometimes outpace the Euro Americans in income and so forth. Um, as well, our educational attainment in America is not matching the occupational needs the country has. Um, our college graduates today often lack critical skills in teamwork, uh, critical thinking skills, analytic reasoning, and there's no short. Everyone knows that we have a nationwide shortage of graduates in science and math and engineering and so forth. Um, and we've had to rely on a lot of immigrants to come over and to help us out there. Um, National high school graduation rate is only about 75% in our country. We have about 32 million functionally illiterate persons in America. And that is a shameful number in a country like this. Uh, that, that high rate of illiteracy really affects a lot of things. When the attention span of your audience is about 8 to 12 seconds, that affects your marketing and your promotional efforts. It affects your teaching. It affects everything that you do. So there are many implications, certainly, for this educational shortage that we have and our lack of critical skills for how business is done. Uh, and a lot of technical work in this country, believe it or not, gets outsourced to other countries. Up until the Trump administration, we would have more immigrants get hired than American workers for critical skills like science, math, and engineering and so forth, because Americans simply couldn't fill those positions. Today, we are definitely in a severe shortage of those sorts of things, with immigration virtually at a standstill. And then we've got an aging workforce. This means people live longer. If they live longer, they take Social Security longer, and that means a drain on that fund, which is really, when it was established, was not meant to be solvent. The thinking at the time in 1931 was that most people are going to die before they ever get any money paid out from the plan, and that has certainly changed by 2020, when baby boomers are refusing to die off as soon, and they are not retiring, and they're staying around. So the aging workforce is a burden, in a sense, on the government because of the entitlements that have been promised over time. The aging workforce means that we could have very interesting generational dynamics in the workplace where we have three generations working side by side. I mean, this has never happened before. I've got a couple videos here for you that I'd like you to take a look at on your own time. They're not really lengthy, over a minute here and just under 3 minutes here, and they talk about some of these current demographic trends. Um, Obviously, there's a certain dynamic in the workplace when you have so many different generations working side by side. These generational differences are really one of the big things that managers in particular are going to have to deal with. Generational differences are plentiful and in some cases very fundamental. If you look at Gen Xers, for example, they're very self-reliant. You can wind them up and turn them loose and they're fine. But compared to millennials, they act very differently in the workplace. Uh, there's a significant difference in life approach between millennials and Gen Xers, and between baby boomers and Gen Xers and millennials and so forth. As well, millennials have difficulty working with or understanding older workers, and it's the same for older workers working with the younger generations. We do have these dynamics, and the lucky managers who have these different generational cohorts all in one workforce are going to have the fun of sorting out all those interesting problems that pop up because of that. Um, there's some great information in our textbook on this, and the authors give some really good discussions. Um, so go ahead and take a look at these video clips when you have some time. This video clip here, I'm going to skip over it, but what it is, it's a graph that's animated. It's on YouTube, and it's just a couple of minutes long. And what it does is show you the history of ethnicity in the United States with a bar graph that's animated and grows as time passes. And so it shows that in the beginning we had Euro-Americans and we had African-Americans, and it showed how the population grew and the percents of population. And it shows when we've got our first Latino people arriving, the first immigration groups from Europe, and so forth. It's a fascinating video, and it will give you a real idea of how immigration has changed in a nutshell in just a couple minutes here. So I ask you to go ahead and take a look at that. Here are a couple theories to talk about to really, from social psychology, to understand how these social dynamics really do play out in the workforce. We have social identity theory and social categorization theory. Social identity theory really says that the way we look at ourselves, that core dimension of our personality, our identity, is largely defined by what groups and social memberships that we have. How do we identify with people? Who are those people? And so forth. Social categorization theory says that the way we categorize our world, our social world, into groups, those we belong and others that we don't belong. So it's more of a us versus them way of looking at the world. We have our in groups and our out groups. So let's just give some details on both of these. They're two very opposite theories when you think about it. They come to completely opposite conclusions about diverse group interaction, because that's what we're really talking about here, how we can have groups that are either diverse or homogeneous. That's what social categorization theory and information decision-making theory are about here. Both theories have a solid body of research to support their thinking. And that's what's so intriguing about this, because they come to opposite conclusions about the same thing, and they both have a serious body of research to show for it. So I think what we can glean from that is that both have validity, depending on the circumstances. So let's talk about social categorization theory first. In this one, similarities and our differences are used as the basis of forming groups. So the social categorization theory is the one that has that significant dynamic of the in-groups that you're in versus all the out-groups that you're not in, and you display those sorts of in-group, out-group behaviors. According to the theory, positive outcomes result when the group members have some sort of basic liking in common, or some kind of common attraction due to their similarities. And there is a large body of research that says this is true. So what we have from social categorization theory is that these are homogeneous groups where the people in them are all very similar, very much alike. And they're saying that these groups are more homogeneous and that they have a higher group cohesion and commitment. So the theory supports the idea that homogeneity is better than heterogeneity in terms of work-related behavior, attitudes, and performance, and the outcomes of working in groups. In other words, they're saying that homogeneous groups have better outcomes than diverse groups. And generally, I think you'll find that's not what we're taught in most of our classes. But remember, these are theories, and they both do have their research to support them. Now, the information decision-making theory is almost a complete opposite of this social categorization theory. They say that diverse groups outperform homogeneous groups, and this is what we generally hear from most of our studies. And the reasons are that diverse groups should have a broader range of task-relevant knowledge. They bring in diverse perspectives, so you get a broader range of knowledge that any one person probably hadn't thought of on their own. They should also have different opinions and different world perspectives on how they interpret data and the same information. And the idea here is that they have a larger pool of resources to draw from. So there are three positive aspects that they can point to from their research of these diverse groups. When it comes to problem solving, these diverse groups are much better in the early phases where you generate all the alternatives and comprehensive view of the problem and have enough discussion to really get to the root of the problem. As well, the second one would be the diverse groups are better at brainstorming and uncovering all those alternative choices that you would use to solve the problem. And then finally, diversity can enhance the number of contacts. In other words, it expands your world because you do have different world perspectives and so forth, and it gives you access to other external things of new information and expertise that you wouldn't have had just as homogeneous sorts of individuals. And there is plenty of research to support this theory as well. And in fact, this is the one that generally gets put out there most of the time when you get any kind of class in group dynamics or anything like that. You're really getting the information decision-making perspective. I think the truth of it is, like I said earlier, that both theories are valid, and that depending on circumstances, a homogeneous group certainly could produce great results. On the other hand, the homogeneous group would be subject to the worst of the downside of group behaviors, right? That would be things like group thinking, obviously, maybe satisficing, coming to quick conclusions, not coming up with as good a decision, and so forth. So it is something to think about, that there's more than one perspective to look at how things work. Now, certainly there are plenty of barriers and challenges to managing diversity out there. We have stereotypical attitudes, which people bring with them to the workplace. And we really want to get away from that sort of thing in the workplace. We want to discourage people from acting out their stereotypical thoughts and so forth. The best way to manage and benefit from diversity is really to engage with practices that promote a satisfied workforce. And that means letting everybody know that they're included. So inclusiveness really matters, and it helps counter stereotypical thinking. But it is rampant in U.S. society as it is around the world, stereotypical thinking. So it is something that you'll have to be on guard against all the time. Diversity is a fact in the business world, so you certainly have to be aware that because of this diversity, these stereotypical attitudes are now going to be more in play. Um, we have to provide diversity training as one means to combat this sort of stereotypical thinking. That means everyone in the organization gets the training. Sometimes some of this stereotypical thinking simply comes from ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is the belief that one's own culture or way of life is superior to all the rest that are out there. And this is quite a rampant belief around the world. And of course, everybody who is ethnocentric believes that they're the best. And this is the source of a lot of tension and strife and indeed wars over time in the world. Um, this kind of thinking, ethnocentrism in the workplace, results in a hostile work environment for most employees, particularly for any diverse employee, anyone of ethnicity, which today is going to be about 2/3 of your workforce. And these groups that can be offended by this ethnocentric and this hostile work environment are any protected group like women, or any minority group member, or an older worker, or extremely young worker, or a gay worker, or a disabled worker, or people who are obese, all of those sorts of things. So unsupportive, hostile work environments are not the way to go. And if you sense that there's something wrong in your organization, you have to bring it to light, and you have to act to reverse it. You simply do. You have to really promulgate the idea and let your workforce know that there is no reverse discrimination involved in embracing a diverse workforce. Your diversity is not the result of someone not getting their job they were destined to have. It is not reverse discrimination. It is finding the best people for the best job. Um, the demands on women are greater in the workforce, and that is always a challenge. And we have to be empathetic to that, because of family issues and so forth are probably greater than the demands on men. Um, and so organizations have to understand work-life balance is a real issue for many families. That women are often the caretakers of the children. They have to deal with the child care when there is some. That they need some flexibility in scheduling on evenings, weekends. They have family commitments, in other words, and things like that. Smart organizations overcome these challenges and barriers and find ways to work with people. It's as simple as that. Um, the diversity climate in any given organization that you work for is going to be the sum of all the employees who are there, all their attitudes about the organization's diversity policies and efforts, and whether or not they embrace them. And again, smart organizations know that embracing diversity in the workplace often means some changes, means accommodating. It also means changes in thinking, the way people are viewed, the way they are evaluated, and also in the way that managers themselves handle their interpersonal relationships with a higher degree of awareness. In effect, managing diversity is absolutely vital to an organization's success in the workplace. Now let's wrap this up a little bit by talking about some of the things that R. Roosevelt Thomas had to say on practices to manage diversity. And you can see his picture here. R. Roosevelt Thomas is actually quite famous in the worlds of diversity thinking and research. He's written numerous books. He's quite active on the lecture circuit and so forth. I've got a YouTube video clip. I previewed it, and the audio on it is very bad, so I'm not going to play it. It echoes quite a bit, although there are lots of videos of him on YouTube, and I should actually remove this, but you could click on it and you could still hear it and everything, but it is a little bit too much echo. Thomas's really contributions to diversity are ongoing because he's still at it, and he has what he calls his generic options for managing diversity. And a lot of it is really just conceptual thinking of ways to do things. In other words, one of the things he said is one way is to manage your diversity is to make a conscious effort to increase the numbers of minority workers at all levels of the organization. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a quota or that you have to hire unqualified people. What it does mean is that you expand your selection pool of applicants when you recruit new workers and bring in people and applicants from places that you normally have not looked, have not found them for before. Or if you're using an agency or something like that, then tell them you really are interested in some diversity and have them cast a wider net and find you diverse candidates to choose from. That way you get people who are qualified, but it gives you a diverse pool to choose from. Um, some companies or even industries go into complete denial that diversity is an issue for them at all. And those companies are probably the ones who have the worst diverse climate, I would bet, of other companies when compared. Insurance industry is one that is, I would say, is a little bit in denial about having a diverse workforce. I mean, think about it. How many of you really think of females when you think of your insurance agent? Now, I've had insurance agents who were females before, and I do now. But I think a lot of people really immediately it pops up that it's a man in a suit. And that's a common perception. It's a stereotypical attitude about that. And it is one of those industries that is still largely a boys' club, although there's been huge inroads made into it, like there has been in real estate, where in the beginning, real estate was handled by pretty much men only. And then gradually, today, we see lots of women in that industry as well. Um, so our Roosevelt Thomas talks about that we should take a low-key approach, that we should look in those places where we see that we could improve and work on those areas. Um, so if people don't buy into the attitude in any given organization, I'm talking about top managers, then they're going to do things like suppress talk of even needing diversity training or awareness or something like that. They're going to have a sort of a maintain the status quo approach that sort of hides from the demographic reality of the workforce, that today is a diverse workforce. So organizations can't really ignore diversity. And Thomas likes to talk about this, that we just have to raise awareness. Companies just have to put a little more effort into it. Similar is the idea that sometimes a company will get some diverse employees and then they end up becoming somewhat isolated in the company because the attitude from the beginning is, well, okay, we fulfilled our obligation to affirmative action, and here they are. It's what Thomas calls tokenism, and he's right about that. Uh, they end up sometimes all in a certain department, and it just sort of defies the logic of why they were hired in the first place if they all end up in the same department. That makes no sense. You're categorizing people and so forth. Or your diverse employees get put on special projects only. So they are getting career and professional development like everyone else, but it's not quite the same. They're getting special projects and they're not widely interacting with general projects and so forth that other general employees would get within an organization. And this happens a lot more than people would think. So this again is about tolerating diverse employees, that sort of thinking where it employs a little bit of tokenism and a little bit, okay, we'll tolerate them. Organizations that do that are not really realizing how they are hurting themselves in the marketplace and how their competition is certainly embracing diversity and going to outperform them. So that's the sort of approach that says differences are tolerated but not embraced or valued. So what should you do? Well, an effective practice is really to try and assimilate everyone into the workforce. Is that certainly you're not all going to become the same, but you're all going to become the same citizen within your organization. And so you begin the whole process by giving everyone who becomes hired into the company an orientation experience that from the very beginning communicates the organization's espoused values, that in particular, in this case, you believe in diversity. And then you follow up and you actually reinforce and support what you've said. So you can do this and it will build lasting relationships that overcome differences. So you provide annual sexual harassment training. You provide annual diversity or awareness training. sensitivity training, whatever it might be that you think you need. Um, the idea is that acceptance and understanding is going to produce a better result for your organization than isolating or suppressing or just tolerating those who are different. So you want to create a climate where people feel like they're growing together, actually, and they're doing it by understanding their very real human differences. So I do like Thomas and the way he thinks, because he kind of gives us a laundry list, really, of what's happening in the real world and how to do that. Okay, folks, that's all I wanted to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.